The ferry left me on the rocks at low tide, and I watched it vanish into the fog before I let myself turn around. Black Rock Lighthouse stood the way it always had in my grandfather's letters, tall, proud, indifferent. He'd kept that light burning for 40 years. Then, 3 weeks ago, the light stopped. No calls. No radio. Just silence, and a Coast Guard report that said the keeper's cottage was empty, the door left open, and his boots still by the fire. I told myself I was here to close up the house. Sell what could be sold. That's what you tell yourself when you don't want to say the real reason, that some part of you needs to see the empty room for yourself before you can believe it's really empty. The gate to the cliff path hung crooked on one hinge. I pushed it open. It didn't creak. It should have creaked. The keeper's cottage smelled like salt and something underneath the salt, something sweeter and wrong. His boots were exactly where the report said, standing upright by a dead fireplace, laces still tied, as if he'd simply stepped out of them without untying a single knot. On the table sat his logbook, open to the last entry. His handwriting, usually so neat, degraded across the page like it had been written by someone falling asleep, or someone whose hand had stopped fully belonging to them. "The light doesn't keep them out anymore," it read. I think it was never keeping them out. I think it was keeping something in. I closed the book. My hands were steadier than I expected. I told myself that was a good sign. The lighthouse stairwell spiraled up into darkness, iron steps rusted at the edges, the walls slick with condensation that shouldn't have been there in a sealed tower. I climbed with the lantern held high, its light catching on old brass fixtures and something else, thin gray handprints on the wall, at odd angles, some upside down, as if whoever left them had been climbing the ceiling instead of the stairs. I counted the steps out loud. It kept my mind from counting something else, the sound, faint but constant, of breathing that wasn't mine, matching my pace one step behind. I stopped. The breathing stopped. I told myself it was an echo. The lamp room at the top was worse than I expected and exactly what I feared. The great lens sat cold and dark, its brass housing streaked with the same gray handprints from the stairwell, dozens of them, layered over each other like something had been clawing at the glass from the inside for a very long time. Through the salt-fogged windows, the ocean churned black under a moonless sky. And reflected faintly in the glass, not outside, but reflected, meaning it was behind me, stood a shape too tall and too thin to be a man, its head tilted at an angle no neck should allow. I didn't turn around. I watched it in the reflection instead, and it watched me watch it. I turned around anyway. Some part of me needed to know, even as the rational part screamed that knowing was exactly what it wanted. There was nothing there. Just the empty room, the cold lens, my own shadow stretched long across the floor by the lantern light. But the temperature had dropped enough that my breath fogged the air, and on the floor, in a thin layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed by my footprints, something had written a single word, in a hand that wasn't mine and wasn't quite my grandfather's either. Stay. I backed toward the stairwell. The lens behind me groaned, metal against metal, as if it were turning on its own, though there was no wind, and no power, and nothing left in this tower that should have been able to move. I ran. The stairwell that had taken minutes to climb seemed to stretch forever going down, the iron steps ringing under my boots louder than they should, echoing up into the dark like something counting along with me. Halfway down, the lantern flickered, and in that half-second of near dark, I felt fingers, thin, cold, too many joints, brush against the back of my hand. I didn't stop to look. I didn't dare give it the satisfaction of my fear reflected back in whatever passed for its eyes. I just ran, boots slamming iron, lungs burning, until the stairwell spat me out into the cottage, and I slammed the door behind me hard enough to rattle the dead fireplace. Silence. My own ragged breathing. Nothing else. For now. With shaking hands, I opened the logbook again, flipping backward through months of my grandfather's entries, searching for when it started. I found it 80 pages back, dated the night of a storm the record called the worst in a decade. "Something came ashore tonight," he'd written. I saw it climb the rocks like it belonged to them. I lit the lamp brighter than I ever have, thinking light was armor. It only smiled at the light. Now I understand, the light was never a warning to sailors. It was a leash. Something my father's father put here to keep a door shut, and I think, God forgive me, the leash is fraying. Outside, the wind had gone very still. Too still. And the light at the top of the tower, dead for 3 weeks, flickered once on. I understood then why the boots were still tied. Why the door was left open. My grandfather hadn't been taken. He'd gone back up, on purpose, to hold a door shut with nothing but his own body and 40 years of stubbornness, because the alternative was letting it walk free onto a coastline full of sleeping towns. The light flickered again above me, weaker this time, like a heartbeat losing its rhythm. I thought about the ferry, gone until morning. I thought about running down to the rocks and screaming into fog no one would hear. And I thought about my grandfather's handwriting, degrading line by line, still writing anyway, still trying to warn whoever came next. I picked the lantern back up. My hands had stopped shaking. The second climb was worse, because now I knew what waited. The handprints on the walls seemed fresher, wetter, as though something had climbed past only moments before me. The breathing returned, still one step behind, but now it didn't bother pretending to be an echo. At the top, the lamp room was bathed in a dying amber flicker, the great lens turning on its own, slow and grinding, throwing long broken shadows across the tall thin shape that stood waiting beside it, no longer just a reflection, but standing solid in the room, facing me directly for the first time, its tilted head unfolding at an angle that made my stomach turn. It didn't move toward me. It only waited, the way old things wait for the ones foolish enough, or brave enough, to take up a post someone else had to leave empty. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I walked past it, straight to the lens housing, and pressed my grandfather's brass lantern flame against the ancient wick inside, the way keepers had done for 200 years before either of us. The great lamp caught, sputtered, and roared back to full light, sweeping its beam out across the black water in one slow, blinding rotation. The shape let out no sound at all. It simply folded inward on itself, like something remembering, reluctantly, the shape of a door, and was gone, leaving only cold air and the smell of salt. I stayed at Black Rock that winter. I keep the light now. Some nights I hear breathing on the stairs, one step behind mine, and I don't run anymore. I just climb a little faster, and I keep the flame burning, because now I understand what my grandfather understood too late. The light was never for the sailors at all.